This week's Low Budget Binge looks at indie films featuring sharks, ghosts, cults, and a giant fly. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. First up is Great White. It's new in select theaters, on demand, and digital download from RLJ Entertainment. It's directed by Martin Wilson and written by Michael Boughen. When a couple hire a charter plane to take them to a secluded island off Australia, the four of them find themselves trapped in a raft with a pair of hangry sharks circling them. I have an absolute fear of sharks. For some reason, watching shark films evokes at least one jump back in my seat and a few uncontrollable urges for me to curl up my legs and scream. I don't know why, other than the fact that I saw Jaws at a very young age. I never had any contact with sharks. I swam in the ocean as a kid, and most likely there were sharks around, but I never paid any mind to it at the time. But for some reason, shark films, more than most, get to me. That said, having seen quite a few shark horror films, I know this is a genre that is a tricky thing to get right. Either you're a Jaws ripoff, a cheesy, badly animated shark flick, or one of those rare films that actually strikes a chord with that primal fear we all have of being eaten alive, feet first, by giant jaws from the deep. Great White is a decent enough horror film. It's got an interesting, though common, setup for this subgenre of horror. A group of people are stranded at sea and surrounded by sharks. While this is the premise of such shark horror greats as The Reef or Open Water, Great White doesn't really match that level of intensity those modern classic shark flicks achieve. I think the main reason is the cast really lacks any kind of character to latch onto. There's the arrogant businessman booking this trip, his quivering wife, the swarthy assistant/cook, the outdoorsy pilot, and his girlfriend, who is more sensible and business-minded of the two. Beyond that, very little by way of character is given to this cast, and soon-to-be chum. Because we don't get to know these characters much before the sharks attack, you don't care. And if you don't care about the characters, you really have a problem with your movie. That said, the acting is decent in Great White. They just don't have a lot to do, but act in a cliched and lazy manner due to the uninspired script. None of the motivation gives you anything to root for. It's all just surface-level detail that is a surefire indication as to whether or not it's time for that character to die. Aside from a few jump scares, there's little anticipation or intensity to Great White. It's just annoying people set up to be eaten when it's their turn in the queue. It doesn't help that the CG animation for the sharks themselves are pretty bad. When it's just the fin slicing through the waves, it works. But anytime CG is used to have the shark leap out of the water and nearly chomp the cast in the raft, I was less frightened and more inquisitive as to how effects this bad are in what looks to be a decently produced film. There are a few extremely bad shots in Great White, and in this day and age where decent renderings don't really impact the budget all that much, it really is inexcusable. As much as they scare me, I look forward to every shark film, and shark films usually do it for me. But because of some bad effects, lazy writing, and a lack of relatable characters, Great White just didn't work. Sleepless Unrest is new on DVD and Blu-ray, on demand and digital download from Gravitas Ventures. It's directed by Kendall Whelpton and Vera Whelpton. A group of paranormal investigators visit the house that inspired the first Conjuring film and stay there for a number of days trying to capture proof of ghosts and the supernatural in their cameras. This documentary seems to have been filmed during the pandemic and tries to explain the long twisted history of the home and prove the supernatural exists. While I used to be quite a fan of paranormal investigator shows like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and the like, early on, before those shows caught on and became popular, I got bored with the same questionable investigation techniques, the same reactions from the investigators, and the same lack of any kind of substantial evidence found in each episode. So I bailed, and really haven't looked back at these all too familiar shows since. Sleepless Unrest is my return to the paranormal investigation documentary style show, and it seems nothing really has changed. What the hell is that? Or some kind of variation of swearing and questioning is the go-to reaction of every investigator. Dust particles and settling house sounds are attributed to the supernatural first before most logical explanations are explored. And of course, the technology, built to be ultra-sensitive and react to the slightest change in temperature, movement, or sound, is used to provide undeniable proof of the existence of ghosts. For the most part, Sleepless Unrest is like pretty much all other paranormal investigator shows, so if you get into those shows, here's a full-length film to entertain you. Sleepless Unrest is not without its moments. There's a moment caught on tape where it seems something visible raps on the window leading outside. There's also an intriguing sequence in the woods where the show seems to morph into an episode of Finding Bigfoot as the team encounters strange noises, even wood knockings and lights in the woods. These are the most intriguing moments of the film, and I must admit, they are chilling, but they are very few and far between. Small details seem to be left out of this doc, which called the integrity of the filmmakers into question. The owners of the Conjuring house recently bought the home and seem to be using it as some kind of museum, Halloween haunt locale, as there are visible skeletons and spooky props littered throughout the grounds. I don't know why this fact was left out, other than the fact that it might lead one to question the veracity of the experience if the audience knew this location was used to make money as a haunted attraction. Here's something that bothered the hell out of me. What the hell does Sleepless Unrest mean exactly? This redundant title makes little sense and really has nothing to do with the film. The investigation doesn't provide much indication as to why these two words were threaded together to make the title, other than the fact that a few of the investigators claimed they had bad dreams during and after the investigation. If you're a believer, there's enough in Sleepless Unrest to keep those beliefs afloat. If you're a skeptic, there's the same amount of evidence to prove your point as well. The final moments attempt to make the whole experience something much bigger than it was, and the momentum falters because of this need to justify a movie-length paranormal show. Sleepless Unrest isn't a terrible paranormal investigation experience. It has its moments, but its biggest sin is that it isn't anything different than every other episode you've seen. A Classic Horror Story is new, streaming on Netflix. The director is Roberto and Paolo Strippoli, and it's written by Roberto Paolo Strippoli, Lucio Besana, Milo Tissone, and David Bellini. A group take part in a rideshare through Italy, but after their bus has an accident, they find themselves in the middle of a mysterious woods in front of an even more mysterious house. And that's not the only mysterious thing going on when a cult of masked townsfolk show up with pitchforks and torches, ready for a sacrifice. A Classic Horror Story riffs on many modern and not-so-modern horror films that you've probably all seen. The group of tourists who find themselves in this dire situation spring from the same seeds we've seen in films like Wrong Turn and Hostel. There are wholesome and not-so-wholesome characters aboard, and all of them prove to be nice fodder for the cultists and would-be folk legends to slice and dice their way through. The setting, referred to in the film as a Sam Raimi house, looks more like something out of Midsummer with its pentagram-like shape. In fact, without Midsummer as a reference point, this film might look downright spectacular. Instead, the deceptively serene and wooded landscape, the strange architecture, the masked locals, and the folksy rituals feel more like a direct lift from Ari Aster's last flick. While I wasn't blown away by Midsummer, as most, I will concede that it is a well-made, well-thought-out piece of filmmaking. Sadly, A Classic Horror Story pales in comparison. The problem is that A Classic Horror Story spends so much time aping and paying homage to other films that it really forgets to add anything new to the folk/tourist subgenre. Sure, it's creepy to see a group of people wearing masks and emotionlessly staring at the camera, but it's nothing we haven't seen before in Midsummer and Kill List before it, and The Wicker Man before that. And while Midsummer delivered some powerful emotional impact, Kill List offered an unpredictable storyline, and The Wicker Man started it all. What A Classic Horror Story adds to be distinct doesn't work and ends up knocking the knees out of all of the tension built up to the climax. There is a twist. I won't ruin it, but the whole thing becomes pretentious and self-referential, killing momentum achieved in the good-looking but familiar first hour. A classic horror story has good intentions. It seems to want to be some kind of clever take on the horror genre, lobbing callbacks at every chance it gets. But while it is rather gory, the performances are decent, and the imagery is both enchanting and horrifying at times. It just doesn't deliver the goods that it thinks it does. I like the way the film incorporates local folklore involving a trio of monstrous wizards who haunt the countrysides, but there just isn't enough there that feels original. It feels more like a clumsily stitched together quilt of better folk and tourist horror films, not the classic horror its title suggests. Mandibles, aka Mandibules, is new in theaters and on demand from Magnet Releasing. It's directed and written by Quentin Dupieux. When a pair of bumbling morons agree to transport a package from one shady businessman to another, they steal a car to do so and happen to find a schnauzer-sized fly in the trunk. This distracts them enough to hatch a new plan, train the fly to follow their orders, and then become rich. Level-headed and literal-minded thinkers take off. We're about to enter the absurd world of Quentin Dupieux. While it's not as off the reservation as Rubber or precisely staged as his last film, Keep an Eye Out, Dupieux's Mandibles is a wonderfully funny and occasionally poignant little story about opportunity and happenstance. The story doesn't seem to move towards any intended goal. Instead, the story kind of meanders like a drunk across the French countryside, encountering different people and getting in and out of weird situations. One might want to rack your brain attempting to bring meaning to this giant fly and these two buffoons trying to profit from it, but that might distract you from simply enjoying the subtle and broad comedy going on. I do feel there is some method behind Dupieux's madness in Mandibles. It is about dreaming big and living life by the seat of your pants, taking opportunities as they fall in front of you, but goes about it in an absolutely off-kilter way, using all kinds of dream logic and characters that you can't help but fall in love with. Actors Gregor Ludwig, who also starred in Dupieux's Keep an Eye Out, and David Marseilla's play Manu and Jean Gab, respectively. Like the comedy duos of old, like Laurel and Hardy and Martin and Lewis, to the more modern comedic pairings like Beavis and Butthead and Bill and Ted, Ludwig and Marseilla's play off each other marvelously. The way they rationalize every odd twist and turn they encounter is amazing to see. While they seem to understand very little in life, they do know how to roll with the punches, and their moronic resilience is refreshing. These two guys are undeniably likable, and you can't help but root for them to succeed despite how stupid their plan is. The fly itself is quite a marvel. Part practical effects and part CG, it really does look fantastic and real in the scene. The jittery and staccato movements make it look real, but subtle gestures give it a sense that maybe, just maybe, it sort of understands and might even have feelings for this bumbling duo. While most of the time it's wrapped up in being carried around by our heroes, either by CG or practical, this fly looks like it may very well exist in the real world. Another standout worth mentioning is the fantastic comedic performance by actress Adele Exarchopoulos. Hers is a smaller role as she plays a woman who suffered from a car accident in her youth and now is slightly delayed and is unable to control the volume of her voice. While it may be seen as insensitive by some, she brings a vibrancy and otherworldly charm to her performance that deserves recognition. Mandibles is goofy and bawdy fun. It's not necessarily a horror film, but it does have a gigantic fly in it, which will be pretty horrifying to some. I know I'd shit myself if I saw a fly that size. It ends in the only way it possibly could and left me with a gigantic smile on my face. If a movie about two buffoons and a giant fly causes even the slightest smiles, give Mandibles a shot. It's absurdist cinema at its best. That'll be it for today. Please chime in down below in the comments and let me know how on the nose or mind-numbingly wrong I am, or you can counter with your own review. So guys, you know how YouTube works. I'd love to be able to dedicate more time to this channel. I'm not monetized yet, so if you want to help me out, remember to hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below. Want some spooky comics to read? I have 2 new horror comic book trade paperbacks you should look out for. Both Gravetrancers and Pirouette, collecting never-before-published issues, can be found in only the finest of comic book shops. If you're looking for written reviews, you can find them on my website, mlmillerwrites.com. If you really want to show your support, I also have a Patreon page at mlmiller. Look for the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for your time. and take care.
You're doomed.